Hey everyone, welcome to Times of Israel Behind the Headlines. I'm Sarah Tuttle-Singer, the new media editor at Times of Israel, and I am thrilled to be here with a friend and someone I deeply admire, Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi David Wolpe is the Max Webb Senior Rabbi of Sinai Temple. Rabbi Wolpe previously taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York, the American Jewish University in Los Angeles, Hunter College, and UCLA. Rabbi Wolpe is the author of 8 books, including the national bestseller, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. His new book is titled David the Divided Heart, and it was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Awards and has been optioned for a movie by Warner Brothers. Rabbi, first of all, Shana Tova, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to see you, Sarah, even though it's only virtually. I wish it were in person, but
me too.
The best we can do right now.
Me too. Next year in Jerusalem, we'll meet up again.
That's right. Yeah.
And I appreciate you taking the time to be here during this special time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, these are unprecedented times, and we're navigating uncharted waters here. And the Jewish community draws incredible strength from being a community and meeting face to face. But in the wake of COVID-19, we've had to rethink and innovate and create different ways of being a community. Could you talk a little bit about that and walk us through the last 6 months and what challenges have you faced as a rabbi and what new opportunities have you discovered?
So I can now speak about it actually better than I could have a couple of days ago because we've been through Rosh Hashanah and I know something more than I did before. And let me just say, some things are virtual and some things are in person. The reason that I've got the classic white shirt and black suit on is because I'm going from here to a funeral, and funerals we're still doing in person, although with social distancing and by the graveside and a small number. So that has changed in ceremony, but not in substance. But Rosh Hashanah was different in substance. Starting a few months ago, we realized that we were not going to be able to have 5,000 people in our building, as we usually do in various services. And so we began interviewing production companies, which I know sounds weird if you don't live in LA. And in some ways sounds especially weird living in LA because it's something I never thought as a rabbi I would be doing. But there we were.
It makes total sense.
It does, doesn't it?
So wait, well, the film industry is tanking, and yet there's this new
That's right, exactly.
innovation happening.
The only place Hollywood is alive is in the synagogue. It's the Jews inventing Hollywood all over again, this time for Rosh Hashanah. So, and what happened was we hired a production company and we solicited some of our members to pay for their work, and we rehearsed and we had pre-filmed events. And we had some people who sang for us, and we put the songs in, the prayers, but songs in the service, and we had people read Torah and do aliyot, and we matched them all together. So you had 5 or 6 people on the screen, and people watched at home. And the cantor and I, we both got tested the day before the services, and we're getting tested again the day before Yom Kippur. We were together with the production crew that also got tested in the sanctuary, and that was it. And I gave my sermon to empty seats, knowing weirdly that more people were going to hear it this year than ever before, because more people were watching than normally sit in the sanctuary. And so for the first night of Rosh Hashanah, I just looked on my Facebook page, not the Sinai streaming, not any of that. There were 6,000 people who watched, which obviously is not what we had done before. And I got really interesting reactions, overwhelmingly positive. The main reaction that I got was, I did not expect it to be spiritual, but it actually was. And I didn't know that that would happen. And of course, some people said, I like this, I can drink coffee now and watch you. I can sit in my pajamas and watch you. But I think that the future of non-Orthodox services will be some combination of in-person and virtual, because the general sentiment was so overwhelmingly positive.
That's wonderful. What
It
are
is,
some,
it's weird.
so how were you able to create that feeling of a spiritual connection while speaking to an empty, or essentially an empty auditorium?
Okay, so what's happening right now is in some ways a good example. My biggest complaint with Zoom is that I'm now looking at the camera, but it appears I'm looking at you. If I now look at you, which I'm now doing, I'm not looking at the camera. So what I have to do is envision you as I look at the camera. And what I tried to do was to imagine the people whom I know and cherish were sitting there watching me as I looked at the camera. It reminded me, I remember once John Updike, the novelist, said when he writes, he aims his mind at some little old lady just east of Kansas. That's his imaginary audience in his head. And so what I did was, in my head, I created an imaginary audience. Because what happened, I had this revelatory experience. It wouldn't have been revelatory for anybody who had more savvy than I did, but I've been doing a daily inspiration for months. Every morning I would record, except for Saturday and Sunday, I would record like 30 seconds or a minute and sent it out to the congregation. Now I do it 3 times a week. And after the first couple of weeks of doing it, several people said, "We like your daily inspiration, but why don't you ever smile?" And I realized that I wasn't smiling because when I look at the computer to tape it, I'm looking at me. And you don't get up in the morning and look at your face and smile, right? And go, now that's a face. But when you look at other people, you naturally smile. And so I realized I had to look at the camera as though I was looking at someone else. And that's what I tried to do during the service as best I could.
That's really moving. And it touches on something I've been thinking about as we walk around in this very dystopian world where we're all wearing face masks, and we have to really look for the smile behind the mask in the eyes. And what you've described is a very special way that we can try to connect through technology and imagine the people around us. And
exactly.
That is wonderful advice for clergy, for people giving presentations. Thank you. This is a very, very important step. Now, what are some ways that your congregants and people worldwide can feel connected besides just tuning in for the services during the days of awe? And these days of awe are unlike any other we've experienced before.
Unlike any other. I mean, first of all, I think that being able to speak to people has become more important than ever, whether it's phone conversations or Zooms or whatever. Just to be able to talk and find out what other people's experiences are, because in a weird way, this is the first time in human history that everybody has gone through something and knows that everybody's going through something. Like 10 years from now, you can run across someone from Belize and you'll be able to say to them, "What were you doing during the pandemic?" Because you know, even though you don't know anything else about their life, they were going through the same thing you were. And so there is this universal sense, which is beautiful and enables us, I think, to relate to everybody because everybody's going through it. The other, this is a difficult, I mean, especially in America right now, somewhat in Israel, but a little bit less so. I would say that what we really ought to be doing is seeking desperately to understand one another in a time when America is just cleft in twain. There are just two. I mean, I have a politically very divided congregation, and I'm constantly trying to get them to believe that the other side, however much they may disagree with them, is not composed of evil, depraved people who are either abysmally ignorant or just cruel. And it's really hard. It is really hard. And so one of the things that I think we should be working on is how we understand, don't have to agree, believe me, a lot of my congregants I do not agree with, but how you understand and enter into the worldview of the people with whom you radically disagree. And that to me is a crucial issue. I talked about it first day, Rosh Hashanah, I used the example from Rob Dressler where he says basically, everybody has inside of them conquered territory and a battlefront. So if you ask me, do you want to have this salad or that salad? I have to make a decision. If you ask me, do you want salad or a ham sandwich? I don't have to make a decision because my not eating a ham sandwich already conquered territory. For a lot of us, caring about fellow Jews is the battlefront. It's not conquered territory because what's conquered territory are our political views. That we're sure of. And I think that one of the ways that we grow and connect right now is to examine our assumptions about the people who are very different from ourselves. And that's hard to do.
It's very hard to do, especially with November on the horizon.
Yes, exactly. And I'm worried about what's going to happen afterwards too.
Sure. And we're seeing so much of this here in Israel as well, where the discussions, even within families, is incredibly polarizing, vehement, heated, and extraordinarily vitriolic. And I agree with you about trying to see where the other is coming from. But do you have
a prescription. I suggested this for America. You can try it in Israel. I don't know if anybody will ever do it. Here's the idea. I mean, unfortunately, in these days, you can't invite people over for dinner. But the idea is you invite someone over for dinner or invite a couple over for dinner or a family over for dinner who are politically opposed to you. And the entire conversation at dinner has to be about politics, except they have to take your position and you have to take theirs. And you have to argue it as well as you can. And that's and you can't object to the other person. You can't say, no, that's not what I would say. You have to really try as best you can to enunciate the other person's position. Because what happens is arguing is a process of convincing ourselves that we're right. So sometimes you have to force yourself out of that straitjacket.
That's so interesting. And if you do this over Zoom, at least you know that no one's going to be throwing food during the dinner.
Exactly.
But it would also be a great way to facilitate this kind of conversation. And we're as difficult as these days are, at least with this technology, we're able to connect with people from around the world who come from such different backgrounds and walks of life. I love that idea. And that's something I think I'll try to implement that in the coming days and weeks.
Let me know. I really want to know.
Now, how do you think this long-term uncertainty and the challenges, both within our own communities and globally, is changing the Jewish world politically in terms of
let me just say that I'm somebody who's very distrustful of predictions.
Okay.
I think we do it very badly. That doesn't mean I won't do it. Don't get me wrong. I will, but I just think we do it very badly. We're usually very wrong about predictions. But what I would say is that one thing that is clearly happening is that it's not just that people are disagreeing with each other, but that there are packages that you become part of a certain tribe in Judaism. You have to accept all of this or all of that. And when you change your argument, you're not just changing your argument, you're betraying your friends. So if you're on the right, then all your friends are on the right, all your arguments are on the right, you all reinforce each other. And if you express some dissident view, they get very angry at you. And you feel like, oh my God, I've lost my friends. And the same thing on the left. And so what's happening in the Jewish world is that people are becoming more balkanized, more tribalized, and unable, I think, to find something transcendent that connects them together. And that's a really dangerous, I mean, we're 0.2% of the world. It's not like we're dealing with billions of people. It's a really dangerous difference. You can see it in part as you well know and have spoken about in the estrangement of American Jews from Israel. A lot of them aren't part of that tribal conversation. So I think it's a really, it's a dangerous and difficult time for the Jewish people, and I don't know what will happen or what could change it exactly, because life is very unpredictable. The other thing that I will say, which is important and should be said, is I remember when I started out in the rabbinate, my father was a rabbi in Philadelphia. And I remember thinking, you know, anti-Semitism was a significant part of his rabbinate, and he talked about it reasonably often. And I understand why, obviously, you know, he had family, extended family in the Shoah and so on. I thought, but it's not for me. That's not going to be. And for many years, that was true. Anti-Semitism wasn't an issue. But boy, has it come back with a vengeance, both in Europe and obviously in the Middle East and also in America. So that's something else that the Jewish community has to contend with that I didn't think it would. I was naive.
I didn't see this coming either. And it seemed like we were really looking back on it now from where we are. It was as if we were in a very strange and wondrous pocket of time where where folks were a little bit quieter about not liking Jewish people. Can you talk a bit about what you're seeing in America and especially in Los Angeles in terms of this?
Well, half of my congregants are from Iran. And so that gives it a different flavor. They never expected not to see anti-Semitism, right? They didn't live through that period where they thought, oh, this might be going away. So part of it is that they feel there's a certain, I think, both sense of deja vu and also a hyper awareness to anything that seems anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, because it triggers very old associations and memories for them. And this battles at the same time, as you know, with the Universalist Jewish impulse. And the Universalist Jewish impulse is we have to take up the struggle of other groups and so on. And as you know, this is sort of crystallized over Black Lives Matter, because in Black Lives Matter, there have been any number of leaders and any number of statements that are not only anti-Zionist, but anti-Israel. And yet at the same time, there are a lot of Jews who feel as though there's a certain natural alliance between the African-American community and the Jewish community. And this has become now a battleground in the Jewish world, and illustrates that split that is so powerful and painful, where each side can't understand how could the other side not feel the way they do. And I've seen relationships really become very rocky as a result of it. And Los Angeles is a very split community in that way. Also, as we were talking about just before we came on air, other bad things have been happening. There have been fires. The first night of Rosh Hashanah, I don't know whether you're aware of this or not, there was an earthquake here. It wasn't a bad earthquake, but it was an earthquake. And we just felt like, you know, what else you got? So it's a time in which I think nerves are frayed and people are uneasy, and tolerance and calm is at a premium, not easy to find.
It seems that way too. And you know, a rough time, rough days ahead, but also opportunities for learning and for growing. No,
I think that much is, yeah, go ahead.
No,
please.
Well,
I was going to say that what you said is exactly the case, which is there is no difficulty without that opening, none. And you grow from pain much more. That's just the way the world is designed. Then you grow from joy. And I really, since I am by nature a hopeful person, I think we will learn a lot from this. Look, I think during the pandemic, I've kept saying to people, the most important question you can ask yourself is, what kind of person do you want to be when this is over? And what are you doing to create that person? And that's really a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur question, is what kind of cheshbon nefesh are you doing? What kind of internal checks and struggles? And it is possible that people will realize the interdependence of all of humanity, and our sense of one another. Something, I will give you a quick preview into something that I am going to mention on Kol Nidre. So my colleague, Rabbi Danny Pressman, pointed out to me a book by A.J. Jacobs called, I think it's called Thankfulness, a Journey. Basically, he decides he's going to thank everybody who's responsible for his morning cup of coffee personally. And it starts with the barista, but then everybody who manufactures, all the shipping, and he ends up having to take a plane and a small plane and a truck to the growers and the farmers in Bogota, Colombia, where the beans were originally harvested. And he ends up thanking thousands of people. Now, when you realize that's true for a cup of coffee, you know how interdependent we are and how grateful we should be, and how easy it is to just dismiss other people and their labor and their work but in fact, we all stand on each other's backs. And so we live in buildings we didn't build, and we use technology we didn't create, and we wear clothes we didn't make. I mean, we have a billion reasons to be grateful, even in the worst of times.
Oh, that is so true. And it really resonates. And we just published on Times of Israel a study about folks in their 90s and even into their a century old who are living longer. And one of the factors they have in common is a sense of gratitude. They've been through different upheavals in their lives, lost spouses, lost children, sickness, financial devastation. But the people who tend to live longer and tend to live a healthier life are the ones who have something for which they're grateful every single day and feel that optimism around that. So that's such a great reminder. And
it is, after all, what we're supposed to say the first moment of the day is Modeh ani lefanecha, I'm grateful to you. So yeah, gratitude is a big one. It is a big one. But it's so easy, you can cultivate this gratitude and feel this gratitude. And then if you walk outside and you have a flat tire,
yes, sure.
It disappears into thin air. And so you have to constantly remind yourself. You really do.
Right. Now, Judaism has existed for thousands of years despite tremendous upheaval. Now, could you talk a little bit about Jewish resilience and what lessons we can draw on that in the face of getting through this pandemic?
I attribute Jewish resilience to to several things. One of them really is this this familial sense. I mean, this obviously is not so much of an issue in Israel, but in America, I'm always trying to explain to Christians, especially, why Judaism is different from Christianity. Because I tell them, look, if tomorrow you decide, this Jesus stuff isn't for me, you're not Christian anymore. I said, but even though I'm a rabbi, if tomorrow I decide, you know what, I don't believe any of this Jewish stuff, I'm just as Jewish, which is perplexing for them. How can you be just as Jewish? And the answer is that we're a religious family. We're not a religion, we're a religious family. And even if you don't like your family, they're your family. And I think that part of the reason that Jews have survived is because of this familial sense. And without that, it's very hard to make it in the world. The first thing the Bible says is not good. The first thing is to be alone. Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It's not good for a person to be alone. And so the communal sense is, I think, critical. And in some ways, I think peoplehood comes even before, in Ruth, in the classic conversion story. People always say you shouldn't get converted to get married, but that's what Ruth does. She doesn't do it to get married, but she does it. She says to Naomi, your people will be my people. And then she says, and your God will be my God. It starts with people. And so the family and the people part is really important. The other thing that I think has kept Judaism alive is the ability to question and change and grow. It's not a stagnant tradition. We saw this when the temple was destroyed. The most famous examples, the rabbis basically reinvented the tradition, consistent with its principles, but still reinventing, because they knew if you don't, there's no future. And when you think of all the lands and language and cultures that we have moved through, there's been a lot of change and reinvention. The idea that Judaism has sort of skated on the ice of history, and that the Judaism of Moses is the same as the Judaism of Maimonides is the same as the Judaism of the Lubavitcher Rebbe is just not true. It's a nice fiction, but it's not true. So that change is crucial. And then some would say, look, I mean, I would use God. Not everybody would be comfortable with that. But let's for a moment take the theology out of it. And I'll use something that Maurice Samuel, who was a Jewish writer and teacher, used to say. He said, Jews decided that they weren't going to leave this world until they figured it out. And there is something about the Jewish quest to like understand why all this is happening, not only to the world, but to us, that I think energizes and keeps Jews alive. And that, I just said this morning's daily inspiration was from the Pesach Seder, that the four sons, the first one is, of course, the good one, then there's the wicked one, then there's a simple one, then there's the one who doesn't know how to ask. So what is the antithesis of the good son or the wise son? Is the one who doesn't know how to ask, because to not know how to ask is to be not wise. To be able to ask a question is wisdom. And so I think that there is something in the Jewish devotion to inquiry, the fact that the Talmud is filled with arguments, that the question mark is, you know, that there's a great story about I. Rabi, the Nobel-winning physicist. When they asked him what his greatest intellectual influence was, he said, my mother, because when I would come home from Cheder, she would say to me, Itzi, did you ask any good questions today? And that's how he learned that the key to wisdom was asking questions. So I think that we have enormous resilience built into our spiritual DNA from lots of different directions. The challenges are new, but it's there. It's there.
And what new traditions do you see coming out of this period?
I think for most Jews, they're, for better and worse, and I actually just wrote an article with the head of corporate strategy at Microsoft called Buber on Zoom about how you could try to make technology more humanly interactive. But I think that technology is going to play an increasing role in the Jewish tradition. When the 1918 flu pandemic happened, my synagogue was founded in 1906. So we have records of what happened after the pandemic, when 3 months nobody came into the synagogue and then they all rushed back into each other's arms. I think that will happen to a great extent. I think we will rush back into each other's arms. But I also think that the pandemic has fundamentally changed something about normal interactions. People that I used to call on the phone, now they Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I think that people who used to go to in-person services will sometimes say, you know what, today I'm going to sit home and watch it on the screen. I think that's going to happen. And I don't know what effect that will have long-term, but I don't think there's a going back entirely from this. And by the way, Sarah, like this is a good example. We could have done this any other time, but were it not for the pandemic, we wouldn't have done it. And so even the fact that we can reach out across the world so easily, I mean, I'm told that Silicon Valley has closed a lot of offices because people discover now, guess what? I can do the same work from Montana that I can do in Silicon Valley, and I don't have to pay those ridiculous rents. And so it will have social ramifications and Jewish ramifications that will unfold, I think, over a long period of time.
I agree. And I've been thinking about this as well in terms of my own family. And as you said before, we could have been Zooming for a long time now, but it
Right.
took the pandemic to make this now. It's a weekly occurrence for us, and we spend 4 hours going over family history and catching up and sharing new experiences together virtually. It's not the same as sitting together around the table, but it is something, and it's also created a new level up to the relationship because
it started with the
sides of the world.
Started with the Seder.
Mm-hmm.
I have three brothers. One is in Philadelphia, one is in Atlanta, and one is in Washington. And all four of us did our Seder together. And we never did. We could have done it last year. It didn't occur to us. This year, we all did it together. Timing didn't work perfectly, but we all did it together.
Right, and you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's wonderful that you were able to connect. Now, you wrote a very moving national bestseller on loss and on the importance of creating meaning in difficult times. And we've touched on some of that already, but can you talk a little bit more about that and how are you getting through these difficult days of COVID-19 and what would you suggest others do who are struggling?
So my first bit of advice, which is everyone's advice, but that doesn't make it less true, is every morning, early in the morning, I take a long walk around the neighborhood. I do it early for two reasons. One, I happen to be an early riser, but one is because there's no one else around, so I don't have to wear a mask or worry about wearing a mask. And the other 3 or 4 people who I see at the same time every morning, we all wave at each other and keep far away. But also because it's good to begin the day with some movement. And I think actually it's amazing how much moving your body changes your mind. So don't sit in a seat all day. It's not good for you. It's not good for you mentally, never mind physically. And I think that that's a really important thing to say. Second is you have to find people to interact with and force yourself to interact with them. If it means that you have somebody that you sit far away from and talk to, do that. But don't think that I think on-screen interaction is sufficient. Seeing other human beings, even if from a distance, even if masked, so on, is really important. We weren't built, as I said before, the first thing the Torah says is not good, is to be alone. And then the other part of this is the reason that I think the pandemic is harder on younger people than on older people. And by younger, I mean kids. I don't mean 20s, although it's very hard on them. If you're dating and trying to find somebody to marry and so on, this is a tough time. Is children have never outgrown anything. So the first time somebody suffers heartbreak, they think it's forever because they've never outgrown heartbreak and it feels like it will be forever. And so for kids, this feels like forever. And I think it's really important for older people to express to them, I know that it feels like this will never change. I understand that, I really do. And I want you to know that one of the good things about growing older, there are things that aren't good, but one of the really good things about growing older is you get old enough that you've seen a lot of things you thought would never change, all of a sudden change, and this will too. And you have to keep repeating that because the knowledge that this won't last forever is the only thing that sustains a lot of people. And so the key to getting through a difficult time is knowing that times won't always be difficult and finding whatever joy you can in it. Also, read, watch Netflix, do things that give you joy without feeling guilty about having joy. Study, sing, if you dance, whatever gives you joy, because one of the things that we have discovered yet again, even though every human being knows it, but you discover in a pandemic, is nobody knows. Nobody knows. Mi yichyeh u'mi yamut. You could have tomorrow, you could have 20 years, you could have 50 years. You have no idea. one of the things I won't get to do, and I put get in quotes, this year on Yizkor, is look out and see the empty seats from people who I know were there last year. And sometimes I never would have anticipated that that would be the person who wouldn't be there. And they didn't anticipate it either. So it is unwise to live as though you have forever. You don't.
Right. That's a good reminder. And one of the challenges of this pandemic is losing that cushion around that understanding that we will one day die. But I love the way that you framed it in this way. And it's given that some meaning and some purpose. Now, as the sun set on Rosh Hashanah in America, we learned of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death.
Yes.
And she is the first woman and the first Jew to lie in state in the Capitol. What are your thoughts about her legacy?
So it was a blow, I think, to almost everyone. It doesn't really matter what your politics are. In the same way that she was somebody who was friendly with Scalia and they used to go to opera together. I mean, there are some things that transcend politics, and the force of her character and the remarkable journey that she had, agree with her politics or disagree. She was a really powerful, significant figure in the place of women in the United States and worldwide, for Jews, for American jurisprudence, and also she became, especially towards the end of her life, a really I don't know, joyous kind of cultural figure, with movies about her and so on, and so she seemed indomitable for so long, and I think that she will continue to serve as an encouragement to people. She is one of those extraordinary people who achieved far beyond what could have been imagined when she was young. And she did it through force of intellect and force of will. So I think that this is somebody who is an inspiration, and is a wonderful testimony also to the United States. The fact that a Jewish woman achieved the Supreme Court is a tribute to, we always talk, we tend to focus, especially I think this is a tendency lately, on what's wrong about the United States with regard to Jews, but this has still been an incredibly kind and good land for the Jewish people, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a good example of that. There are very, very few places where somebody with her gifts could have achieved as she did in the United States, and we should be grateful for that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. A few days ago on Twitter, I follow you. You quoted. Yeah.
I follow you too.
You quoted Genesis 24:1, and God blessed Abraham in everything. And then
Yes.
you wrote, but Abraham led a difficult life, and so how was he blessed? Everything, you wrote, Rabbi, means light and darkness, tragedy and joy. And this year has brought out much pain, but also beauty and heroism. So what can we learn from Abraham about this? And what lessons can we learn from our biblical heroes and heroines about navigating a chaotic world?
So I think that the reason that we study, and it's beautifully put in your question, the reason we study biblical figures is everything has changed, after all, since the time of the Bible, except human nature. So we really do struggle the way Abraham and Sarah did. And what I would say is, the thing about Abraham that the Torah teaches us, more than anything else, is that age need not be a barrier to growth. I mean, okay, so you can accept that Abraham was 100 years old when he had a kid, or say he was just very old, whatever you want. The point, though, is Abraham wasn't defined by where he was born. He wasn't defined by his parents. He wasn't defined by his culture. And he wasn't defined by his age. He was defined by his relationships to others and to God, and by the force of his own soul. And in that sense, incredibly hopeful character was Abraham, because for all the difficulties of his life, he still was driven by a powerful purpose. And this doesn't mean, by the way, that Abraham, as you well know, it doesn't mean that he was perfect, because the Torah doesn't believe in perfect people, which is a great relief. But he was something that's, in human terms, better than perfect, which is noble and faithful and passionate. And I really, and I would just say that that John Levinson wrote a book about Abraham and the three faiths, and it turns really on one verse, ha'amin, and the word ha'amin and what it really means. And it says Abraham in Islam is submission, and Abraham in Christianity is faith. I mean, that's what he represents in both traditions. Abraham in Judaism is bitachon, or trust, which is built in relationship. And I think that that's true. It's clear that God and Abraham, strange as it sounds in English, they have a relationship. And that relationship is what I think more than anything else Abraham teaches us. Because inside a relationship, you can get angry, you can feel distant, you can feel close. There are good times, there are bad times. What you don't do is give up, because that's the end of the relationship. And so I think that's Abraham's greatest lesson to us, is with the people in your life whom you love, with God, with the Jewish people, even with the world. Robert Frost said in one of his poems that what he wanted as his epitaph was, "I had a lover's quarrel with the world." I think that that's a beautiful thing to say, you know? I think that's good, a lover's quarrel with the world.
That's fantastic. It's perfect. And what you just said ties in so beautifully with what you said about the Jewish family early on.
Yeah, I think that's what we are. We are definitely a people. Look, covenant, which is at the heart of who we are. Covenant is a relationship. That's what it is. That's like a ketubah. A ketubah is about a relationship. And so if there's one thing that defines what the Jewish people have always sort of hung their hat on, it is that idea.
And I love how you told that through Abraham. Thank you. Now, as we wrap up, I'd love to know what books inspire you. What are you reading these days, or what have you read that you particularly loved and would recommend? And since you mentioned Netflix earlier, I'm going to ask you, what Netflix series are you into?
Okay. So first of all, you should know that I am a mystery addict. So
Me too.
I read a billion mysteries, foreign mysteries, some American mysteries, and same thing on shows. I watch mysteries all the time, and could recommend lots of them. So there's that. But in addition to all the mystery reading, let me just turn to the more serious reading. So in terms of the books that most influenced me, I think the one book that most influenced me that not everybody has read, which it takes some focus, but is a book that won Pulitzer Prize actually in the early 70s, called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. A magnificent book, and filled every page with insights about life. I recently read a really interesting book, although I have some problems with it, called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, which basically argues that human beings are at heart good, and makes a really sustained argument with a lot of interesting statistics and so on. That was worth reading as a nice corrective to our assumption that we're just no damn good. And then in terms of study, so it depends what kind of mood I'm in, but for me, what I love most are insightful commentaries, Hasidic commentaries on the Torah. So like if you read Hebrew, Iturei Torah is one of my favorites. Many years ago, Chaim Ben Arza, who used to sell books in the Old City and has unfortunately passed away, but was a wonderful repository of books, sold me a multi-volume series that was written by his, I think it's his cousin, Kito, of comments on the Parsha, and those things I find incredibly illuminating. But the problem that I have in part is that I read a ridiculous amount. I probably read more than I should. In the mornings when I walk, I listen to Anthony Trollope's novels on my headphones, and then I come back and read other novels and nonfiction. So I've always got a million, and if I turned this around, you would see a room full of books. And so what I would say is whatever nourishes you, read at whim. I mean, I read I also read some chess books because I love chess, and Heschel's Heavenly Torah is a beautiful book if you haven't read it, and on and on and on and on. That's why I always tell people when they ask me for book recommendations, tell me what you like and I'll make a recommendation in that area if I can. The only place where I can only make a few recommendations, because I've read a few, but I don't really love it, is science fiction. I've always had a problem with science fiction, but other than that, you tell me what you like and I'll tell you if I have some suggestions in that area.
Oh, these are great recommendations you've already made. I'm an avid mystery fan. Jeffrey Deaver, Jonathan Kellerman, I love the detective fiction and the character development through the series. So we can talk more about that at another time.
We will. We'll have to do that.
It's nice to know that you're also a fan.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Rabbi, thank you so much for your time and for your inspiration, for all you do in the world, in the community of Los Angeles, and then globally through your words and through.
It's great to see you.
It's wonderful
again soon, I hope.
And may this be a meaningful Yom Kippur for you. Thank you.
And for you. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Uva v'chatima tova. Bye-bye.